Hello, tea friends, and welcome to our live broadcast to start off our week of Leaves in a Bowl tea. We try to have a week of Leaves in a Bowl tea once a year at least, and as a community. And so it's really good and a nice kickoff to maybe do this together, at least virtually, since we can't do it together in person. Let's start with the bowl of tea in silence. If you have a bowl, put some leaves in it, any bowl, and just drink a bowl of tea together in quiet, and then we'll have a little talk about leaves in a bowl of tea, hopefully to inspire us to have a week of leaves in a bowl of tea. I hope that was nice. My bowl was very nice. Nice green tea. So today I'm just going to talk, hopefully give some inspiration, a little bit of guidance for leaves in a bowl and why a week of leaves in a bowl and why leaves in a bowl tea occasionally, not just a week. I think like the week of leaves in a bowl tea is like having an like annual retreat kind of. It's a way of maybe deepening practice that's going on all the time anyway. I try to drink leaves in a bowl tea at least once a week, sometimes more, but it's nice to have some like demarcated time each year where you kind of set aside a week or 2 weeks or a few days even and just drink leaves in a bowl tea. For me, all tea lessons are life lessons, so you could take all of the lessons that can be learned from leaves in a bowl tea, from this discussion, and more importantly from questioning and reflecting and you know, bringing these teachings into your life and chewing on them and thinking about them, doubting them, opening them. If you open them into your life, they might apply also to other areas. They do certainly for me. Tea lessons for me very easily propagate into other areas of my life. But I'm going to keep the discussion related to tea. So leaves in a bowl tea really, if you go by legend, it's the oldest brewing method in the world. This is of course how Shen, the divine farmer, drank the very first bowl of tea in the legend, right? The leaves fell into his bowl, or in some cases into his boiling water, depending which version. But that if you take those two versions, you probably get because you know all tea travels back to the boundaries of history and then crosses them and heads into prehistory and legend and mythology. And if you take those two versions of the story, the leaves falling in his bowl and the leaves falling in his ding, his cauldron that he used to boil water, you probably have the oldest ways of steeping tea in the world. Though there's also evidence and that early humans ate tea as well, chewed on it, ate it. So it's possible that eating tea came before steeping it, which makes sense. But in the steeping of tea, this and boiling really are the kind of oldest. And the history, then the historical part, there are several kind of roads you could take to explore the history of leaves in a bowl tea. And I chose one and wrote a very long, in-depth article for the August issue of Global Tea. This year, because of the pandemic, we've had to ship to some places in the world 3 months at a time. And so in honor of those people who have been patient and continue to support us, even though they're getting 3 months at a time, this year I decided to do two-part series. The first two-part series we did was on Yunnan and the Aboriginal people of Yunnan, which is such a wonderful topic that I'm myself so excited about. So that was really fun. We did that June and July. And now August and September we're doing leaves in a bowl tea. And the August issue was all about the history of leaves in a bowl tea. And so if you're interested in following the historical path of this brewing method, you can read that article. And then in the September issue coming up, we talk more about the ceremonialization of this method. But for this leaves in a bowl week, and for today, to kick us off, I'm not going to talk so much about the ceremonialization. I'm just going to more talk about the very difficult topic to discuss, which is, I guess, the meaning, the function, the purpose, the philosophy of leaves in a bowl tea. And why that's really hard to talk about is because I think that leaves in a bowl tea is the absence of all of those things. And so it's very difficult to talk about it, and that's why I'm starting with this warning, because I'm very enthusiastic about promoting leaves in a bowl tea, but that might mislead you to think that the leaves in a bowl tea, what I'm enthusiastic about is a thing, is a way. But actually what I'm enthusiastic about is the absence of a way. And that's really difficult to talk about, because if you make the absence itself into a way, then you trip it up. You catch 22 it. It gets into a nonsensical feedback loop. So there's no real way to talk about it that isn't, I guess, hypocritical and self-defeating, right? Because for me, leaves in a bowl tea, and again, this could be a life lesson too, a lot of these things, but I'm just talking about tea. For me, leaves in a bowl tea is really about stepping past meaning and ideas and analyzation and evaluation and description and all the intellectual, cultural, et cetera, mental, mind-made, human-made aspects of tea. To get closer to where, for me, personally, again, these are tricky things to say in language without there being an issue, but to get to nature, to get to tea itself, to get closer to the mountain where the tea comes from, the clouds that brought the rain and the sun and the bugs and the biodiversity and all those things as they are, not as concepts, not as philosophy, not as idea, but in actuality. Yeah. And I don't know about you, but for me it's very easy I love tea a lot, and I'm a 20th and 21st century human being. So I'm geeky, I'm nerdy, I'm educated, I like to think, I like to analyze, I like to understand, I like to pick things apart. I enjoy all of that, and that there's nothing wrong with that. That's important. But it's kind of like you then start filling a cabinet with more teapots than you can possibly use, and you have cabinets full of samples that you forgot even what they are or where they came from. You start having like so many cups, you also don't know where they came from, and your shelves are filled with tea books and tea magazines, and you're full of information and ideas and descriptors and intellectual stuff that's all foisted upon tea. That's all us. It's not tea. And so it's helpful to set all that down. And I'll unpack that more. But basically what I'm saying is that, the seeds don't categorize themselves. The trees don't separate themselves into varietals. The leaves don't create genres and names for themselves, and the liquor doesn't describe itself through a bunch of similes or metaphors or adjectives, right? So from seed to bowl, tea itself is unadorned with any of that. All of that's in our minds, and so in a way it's about setting that down. And I'll talk more about the function of that, unpack the function of that. But that's kind of the essence of what it's about for me. But if it's about something, then you're tripped up, because then you turn the absence of a way into a way. And then that itself, this is more about letting go of all of that intellectual stuff, all the descriptors, all the intellectual information about maybe chemistry or processing or the geography or regions or culture or brewing method, any of that. This is really, really simple. You put some leaves in a bowl, you add some water, and that's it. There's no real parameters, there's no way. it's not, there's nothing there. There's not any better or worse. There's not any too hot or too cold, no twos, no adjectives to describe it. It just is what it is, and you let it be what it is. Without trying to correct it, without trying to make it better. You just kind of let it be what it is and step past all of that. And there's a lot of reasons for that, which we can unpack, and some of them travel off into other areas of my life. But to start with, even just in the realm of enjoyment, there's a growing body of psychological research that corroborates a lot of ancient Taoist and Zen wisdom in this regard, which in numerous studies suggests that what psychologists are calling verbal overshadowing, which means describing, putting adjectives and talking about what one is experiencing, inhibits the ability to experience, and also inhibits the quality of the experience. So, for example, they've done several studies where they have, wine, and even one study I read was about jam, of all things, and they have like a ranking of the quality of those things based on experts, and the experts have ranked, like 1 to 6, and then they have two groups, and one group is like describing its experience as it's ranking them, and the other one's just ranking them in silence, and the ones that are describing perform far worse. Their results are much more scattered and chaotic and farther away from the standard that the experts had created prior to the study. And if you're thinking, well, that standard by those experts in wine or jam or tea or whatever is itself arbitrary, there's some truth in that. So measuring how we rank things to that scale is, maybe not so conclusive. There are other studies based on our own personal values. For example, they've done a similar study with artwork. And these were prints. And instead of having a standard based on some group of experts saying which print was better quality than another, they took as the standard the length of time that person left that piece of art on their own wall as the standard. So how long do you keep it up? How long does it inspire you? And again, they found that the people that were doing that verbal overshadowing, that were talking about their experience, coming up with adjectives, describing, analyzing, putting it into words as they chose the artwork, kept that artwork themselves for a very short time. And the ones who chose in silence and didn't do that kept the artwork for a long time, suggesting that the choice came from a deeper place, that they chose that artwork and it continued to inspire them, whereas these people that chose it from the mind, that made it a calculation instead of a heart choice, that later they felt that wasn't a part of their long-term goals or inspiration or aesthetics for their home or whatever. That's the point. It was their own standards, right? So through this, you begin to see that like our description and intellectualization of something can prevent us from actually experiencing it. You can't really lose yourself in dance if you're thinking, like most of what inhibits a person from being able to dance is them thinking about like, I wonder what I look like. I hope I don't look silly, right? So in Zen we say if you put yourself in the audience, you spoil the performance. You have to be kind of in the experience, and to be in the experience you can't be commentating on it at the same time. You can't be layering it with any intellectual stuff. And that includes the deep-seated tendency of my mind to evaluate everything, which is a life problem, because if everything is good and bad, how do I ever achieve peace such that I'm okay with whatever's happening? That constant evaluation of everything also results in constant dissatisfaction. And it's deep-seated, right? So it's almost immediate when something happens that there's a evaluation of the sensations that experience causes in my body and a reaction of craving or aversion. And we're getting now to the roots of Buddhism and suffering, which would take us very far afield. But within tea, that idea of constantly evaluating can also inhibit contentment. And more importantly, on a meta level, which I encourage you to reflect on the meta level, finding contentment in contentment. Because before contentment can take up roost in our life, we have to create a nest for it. And that nest that contentment lives in is built out of a respect for contentment itself. So contentment can't arrive until you start to value contentment, until you start to be content with contentment. You find contentment in contentment. You're seeking contentment. You're seeking peace, and so you're letting go of what that part of the mind that wants to say to this, to that, that wants to evaluate and rank everything, which again can in some instances get in the way of actually experiencing, or get in the way, let's say, of the depth of the experience, of how deep the experience goes. So this is like essentially stepping out of the left hemisphere of the brain and into the right hemisphere of the brain, if you want to put it that way, if you're interested in some of those kinds of dialectics. And letting things just be what they are, which is tautological. There's this very silly phrase that people often say, which is that it is what it is, which is it's a vacuous statement, but behind it, even though it can be a silly thing to say, behind it there's a profundity of letting go and letting things be, their suchness. We would say in Buddhism, or in Chinese Duran, they're like self-so, they're naturally so, just what they are, without the commentary, without the definition, without any analytical representation, which is a representation, right? So we're after presentation, just letting go, just leaves and water and heat, and no evaluation, no better, no worse, no method, just the experience itself, just letting go and letting the experience be. And that, again, if you turn that kind of emptiness into a method, you filled it with something. And so this is really more, for me more a practice of pushing things out of the way, pushing out of the way all of the tea stuff that has cluttered my tea space, literally, physically, but also mentally. The information about tea, the ideas about tea, any kind of anything. And that takes me closer or more deeply into the experience of tea itself. It also facilitates something that I value very strongly, which is shouxin, the beginner's mind, chuxin in Chinese. The beginner's mind, that's coming from Sanskrit. The word for wisdom in Sanskrit is prajna, and pra means before, and nya is knowledge. So it's beginner's mind is a way of translating the Sanskrit word for wisdom, a way of understanding it and approaching it. The beginner's mind is receptive, open, humble, and these are all qualities that you cannot seek, which again reinforces the the paradox that I've been discussing about how you can't turn this into something you're after, or you or that becomes self-defeating. Those qualities, like humility, you can't seek, right? I'm so humble. It's the antithesis of humility. Humility is when you let go of self-seeking and self-grasping and self-cherishing, right? So you can't seek it or you trip it up. The same, I think, with beginner's mind. It's not something you can create. It's what happens when you let go of knowing. When you doubt, which is, in Zen we say, right, with great doubt comes great awakening. Little doubt, little awakening. No doubt, no awakening. We have to question. We question ourselves. We question what we know, and we question, the teachings. That's how we chew on them and make them our own. You have to tear them apart. A teaching is wisdom, and wisdom is not a concept. If you turn my teachings or anyone else's teachings into concepts, it's like distilling them into like a bumper sticker or something. It kills them. Wisdom is not an idea. It's not a catchphrase. It's not some thing that you print and then you're like, oh yeah, now I know. Wisdom is actually an opening. It's like a seed. It opens and gathers life to it, or it's like a watering hole in the savannah. It brings all the animals. It brings plant life. It grows and seeds and becomes. It should when it's wisdom, when it's alive, when it's living, it should result in questioning, and that questioning should open into more questions, and it should evolve in this way and become a way of being, living, viewing, questioning. And so this beginner's mind is important. And when you study tea and you start collecting information and data and brewing methods and teaware and all of these things, it is extremely helpful to, on a regular basis, weekly and even annually like this, take a week and push all that out so that you kind of restart the operating system and get rid of all of its bugs and kinks and all of the things you're dismissing as though and the things you're placing on top of tea as opposed to just the tea itself, all the ideas and think, like the thinking I know, which I don't, right? I don't, not at all. And so I value that beginner's mind. And I value that freedom from evaluation. I value the questioning even of that in kind of innate or unconscious, subconscious evaluation of experience all the time into good and bad. And that could be unpacked very deeply, well beyond, we could have a whole lesson on that. And then I value the beginner's mind. The third thing I think that Leaves in a Bowl of Tea gives me, aside from, you could say, questioning or setting down, at least temporarily, my quality control, my evaluation of tea, right? Setting that down and letting tea just be tea without any of those values that are arbitrary, and to question that process in me as well. And then we have the beginner's mind, to let go of what I know and just and kind of rest in not knowing and opening and mystery, right? To connect to the mystery of tea, because there's a lot of mystery in tea. And you can kill that mystery with all the knowledge. And by mystery, it's not necessary for me to take that mystery somewhere. The mystery doesn't have to go somewhere foo-foo to be mysterious. The dismissiveness that sometimes creeps into the modern mind through the gates of science is really more scientism than it is science. It's science beyond its natural limits, and it's not healthy. In other words, the ability to explain a phenomenon scientifically, to understand its causes, science doesn't have anything to say about the value of that, right? However, sometimes we think that because we can explain it, that its mystery is now dismissed. right? So we understand that the northern lights are electromagnetics and in solar radiation and all that stuff, a meteorological phenomenon, in other words. And we say, oh, it's just a meteorological phenomenon, but that just is nowhere in the explanation. That's a value that has been added afterwards, right? Why just? I mean, we're on this giant blue ball flying through space at tens of thousands of kilometers an hour, and there's electromagnetics bouncing off the atmosphere, causing colors, not to mention the billions of years of evolution that have resulted in these incredibly complicated eyes that are seeing it, and the emotions and all these things. There's an incredible amount of mystery in everything. And if you like, that mystery can go to like foo-foo places, unexplained magic, more, I guess, religious or metaphysical stuff. But for me, the simple, ordinary stuff is also it also contains mystery. It also contains the unknown. It also is a gateway to all that is unknown. And that's that beginner's mind for me. I don't tend to follow those threads. So really, for me, it's unimportant whether the mystery leads to some supernatural, maybe foo-foo place, or whether it's just a feeling of awe of what is. Because for me, it's mystery. So it's a letting go of knowing. And so either way, knowledge can trick us into thinking that, into kind of shutting the door on the sense of awe, on shutting the door on wonder, shutting the door on curiosity, and foreclosing on mystery and the unknown. And so for me, Leaves in a Bowl tea is the tea version of opening those doors back up, becoming a child again, becoming a beginner again, knowing nothing again. And the mystery comes flooding in, and I'm connected to the mystery, to the unknown, to the imponderable, to all the aspects of tea that can't be known, can't be discussed, can't be talked about. That all comes back in. And the flooding of that back in, the taking of that literally in, opens me then up to later on to new learning and new avenues of exploration and discovery and wonder and curiosity. So for me, it's that questioning or setting down of the subconscious desire to evaluate, and then it's also an opening of the beginner's mind, which is the opening of the mystery again, connection to the experience of mystery, of unknowing. And then the third thing finally is to unpack a little bit more of that contentment, the feeling of enough. This is related to that evaluating mind that's always evaluating things into good and bad, and always evaluating things into their usefulness. So what is usually that value system that is subconsciously running, it's usually based on some personal / cultural version of usefulness. So what is good is useful, and what is, then things become manipulative, and they become also extremely goal-oriented. And in other words, there's never enough. That's how the cabinets fill with teapots, more than we could ever use, and there's tea all over the place, and more than we could ever drink, and there's information more than we need. And we have that sickness of having more than we could possibly use. And the clutter that starts to overflow from that. And how that frustrates our own happiness and our own well-being, because that is the mind that has created literal giant mountains of discarded clothing, because 2 years ago clothing is out of fashion, and they have now mountains of it. And I'm not even talking about things that are worn out because they were worn and now fashions have changed. I'm talking about unsold, brand new, or vegetables that have cosmetic problems going to waste, etc., etc. Mountains of trash, literal mountains of trash. And that itself is quite obviously out of harmony with nature, because nature has no leftovers. And a natural ecology does not have a single particle left over ever. Everything is used, right? Everything that spills over here is gathered here. Everything that comes apart here is put together here. Everything is becoming. And that's, I guess, what balance means. And you could step back and abstract and say maybe that's what balance is. But there's no leftovers. There's not anything that is trash, right? But we have all this trash. We have all this that comes out of that mind of not enough. And the problem with that not enough mind is that it's constantly, subconsciously dissatisfied with whatever is here and now, and always seeking something else. And then the issue is that even if I get to somewhere else, even if I get to somewhere else, that habit of mind will come with me. And so I get to that place, and once again, I'm dissatisfied. And so even if I had lots of expectations and I really wanted to get there and I was doing lots of work to get there, it's not, I don't have the ability to be there. I don't have the ability to enjoy it. I don't have the ability to be present onto it and be okay with it as it is. So basically, the life wisdom from this is I've learned that if you can't find contentment where you are right now, then nothing you get, no experience, no possession, nothing you get will teach you how to be content with what you have. So the acquisition of any experience, any goal or trophy, or any material possession you've been coveting, it won't be enough, because you'll create a mind where it doesn't, the two people in front of you, and there's psychological research to prove this too, the two people in front of you occupy your mind far more than the 200 behind you. So in other words, you have more than 200 people behind you, but that doesn't satisfy you. Very quickly, we take luxuries for granted. It doesn't take long. They've done studies even with lottery winners and with great traumas like deaths in the family and things. And we're so good at getting used to something. We can turn, like I grew up near train tracks, and the trains, friends would come stay and they would get woken up in the middle of the night, but not me. I slept through it, and to this day I love the sound of trains. I can fall asleep to the sound of trains. So we can get used to almost anything. And so some great luxury that we get, it very quickly becomes something that brings us no joy, but the absence of it will bring us pain. A good example of that is running water, which even in the world today is a luxury. But if you look at it historically, it's a huge luxury for a human being. And yet it's something we take for granted. It's not something we're grateful for. It's not something until it's gone. And then we're upset by it being not there, right? So this not enough-ism also can toxify my tea. And then tea's not, I'm never satisfied. I'm never really enjoying it, and I'm not fully there. And so when I strip away all the stuff and just let TBT, and it's not even that. You see, even that language, let TBT, that's vacuous. It's tautological. It makes no sense. That's not what I'm doing. When I drink Leaves in a Bowl tea, it's not a doing. It's a letting go of doing. It's a surrendering of the impulse to do, or get something done, or be somewhere, or add something, or manipulate something, or fix something, or evaluate something. All of that, for me, it's like the absence of that is bowl tea. You can't evaluate Leaves in a Bowl tea. And if the quality, because any tea, literally any tea, any tea on earth, I could prepare it better than this. any tea in the world. This is if on a scale, if anything, it's the worst way to make tea. It's the worst possible, one of the worst anyway, ways of making tea. There's not a worse way to make tea than this. It's very, and so even if that, like, because we have a habit, right? And so even if that habit of evaluating kicks on while I'm drinking Leaves in a Bowl tea, it kicks on and is like, starts, subconsciously like evaluating this tea and this experience. All it's going to encounter is the worst. And then it's just going to be like, and it shuts down. And it's just like, it has to shut down because like it just realizes like this is, in some ways, like material-wise, brewing method-wise, there's no effort at all to make it better. So it's not about that. This is like, I don't know, your grandma's soup or something. It's about how it makes you feel. It's not about the like refinement of anything. And so even if you do encounter the part of your mind that qualifies or evaluates, it just hits a wall and it has to shut down. It has to let go and kind of sigh and, it is what it is, kind of, and say that silly phrase until it's lets go of itself. And that's really what it's about. It's about letting go of all those things. And so I would like to leave a little time for questions, but the last thing that I like to talk about is a little bit of the history of this concept that we created called living tea, which you'll read about in a lot of our magazines, and where that comes from, because it's relevant to a discussion of Leaves in a Bowl tea and all these topics that I'm talking about, which I invite you to throw over your shoulder, because as I said, if you turn any of this into a philosophy and you say, this is what Leaves in a Tea is about, you're missing the mark, because it's not about anything. It's about simplicity. It's about the unadorned. It's about unassuming. It's about just, ordinary, simple drinking tea without any philosophies or ideas. See, all these ideas are cool, and they lead off into tangents of Zen and Taoism, etc. But if you impose those on Leaves in a Bowl tea, you're also imposing something. And that's kind of the antithesis of what Leaves in a Bowl tea is about. So even these ideas can't be imposed. And as I said, these ideas themselves don't work when you impose them. You can't use effort to be humble or to find beginner's mind or to be content. These are the things that happen when you let go of effort, right? It's like you have turbid water and you stop messing with it, and it starts to separate from that which it's not, and to clarify and become still. So it's really about stillness and not about adding some philosophy on top. That isn't any better or worse than adding discussions of tea chemistry or the varietals or processing methods or geography or culture. And all of that learning, by the way, is wonderful. I love it. I just also love setting it down for all these reasons, to address the evaluatory part of my mind and its subconscious, to cultivate beginner's mind, and to cultivate contentment and a feeling of enough with the simplest of things. So I'm not trying to add some foo-foo thing onto it. I'm not trying to add a philosophy onto it. I'm just trying to be with it as simple as possible. And living tea has to do with that, at least the history of living tea and where I came up with this term living tea. So living tea comes from the Chinese Zhen cha. This character Zhen is very deep. Like most Chinese characters, it goes well beyond my paltry skills to these characters are old and vast and deep, and you can go very powerfully into their relationships, etc. But Zheng, it means true, but it has the radical for upright in it, and it means true almost in the sense of Heidegger. It means true almost like being true to someone or true to something, or an archer's aim is true. And as I said, has the radical for uprightness in it too. And then it can mean like an authentic example of something. And it's a concept in tea that has been important for centuries, going back at least to the Tang Dynasty. this idea of authenticity. Often it was used to talk about tea from a particular garden. And because there is always a tendency in markets to counterfeit things of value, there's always been counterfeit teas. Some counterfeits done in the spirit of dishonesty to kind of be sold as the original, but other counterfeits done in a more flattering sense of like, that tea is great and we want to strive to make something like that. So all kinds of that type of thing, and that became really important. So an example of that, even to this day, if you read our issue all about Wui Cliff tea, Yen Cha, you will see there's Zhenyan. Zhenyan is the Yen Cha from inside the park, the real stuff. In fact, when tea first went to Japan, they developed a practice that maybe also had existed in China, though we don't have specific records of this exact version of it. It might have been based on something, but they would have these parties where they would drink like 20 or 40 teas, and they played a game. You were supposed to mark which teas were Zhen, which teas were true in terms of coming from a particular place, and the winners got prizes, etc. So this idea of authenticity in tea is very old, and it's something that has, of course, fueled lots of debate because people are passionate about tea. And it has carried over not just from tea itself, but to like brewing methods. Like, what is authentic? What is the best authentic way to make tea? Or what's the authentic this from this place, or authentic this from this place? Some of that debate, it can be healthy or unhealthy. Arbitrators of cultural or ethnic authenticity can potentially, as history shows us, lead down very dangerous roads. But tea is tea, so never really like that. More just passionate discussions of what is authentic. And then in the late 90s, one of the most important tea teachers in my life is a master named Zhou Yu. And he was writing, and I was having a lot of conversations with him also about, his idea was that if there is to be an authentic tea, it shouldn't be authentic, real, based on human standards, but based on tea standards. In the way that we say someone is authentic when they are true to themselves, right? Not when they, follow a group, they follow their heart, they're true to themselves. So he was saying, like, authentic tea is tea as tea, as tea is not, tea from a particular place, not some human idea or a human standard, but a natural standard. And I liked these contemplations. I liked the interrogation and philosophy and learning and questions that I would come up with him. And when it came time to translate Zhen Cha, I didn't really like the English words authentic or real, which are often used to translate this character. And they didn't capture, in my opinion, the essence of the character Zhen, nor did they capture the essence of the conversations that I was having with this teacher and the richness that was coming in through these conversations. And so I took some poetic license. I wanted something a little bit deeper. And so I took some poetic license, and I invented this term living tea, which most of you are now familiar with because we've been publishing it for 20 years. So that's where it came from. And then later on that evolved, and I started the next step, because as I said, wisdom is an opening, right? More questions, more thinking, more doubting. I started trying to think of criteria. What is authentic from tea's perspective? And that's where we've come up with 6 criteria. There might be 27, but 6, seed propagation versus cuttings. An authentic tea from tea's perspective would be propagated by seeds because that's how tea propagates itself in nature. And so that exploration of authenticity isn't meant to be like to join the debate of like, those other versions of authenticity are not authentic. We have the authentic authenticity, right? That's not the point. It's more just like what happens when you think like this, and what happens when you think in ecological value versus human value. And that's why it's relevant, I think, to this discussion, because you could say like that it's like Leaves in a Bowl tea is like meeting tea with as little human mind-made ideas, concepts, values between us and tea, so that we can connect to the mystery and the nature, to connect to nature through it. And then also to set down all the tea stuff I've accumulated, and maybe question the value of all that stuff, both in terms of cluttered knowledge and cluttered stuff, and whether I actually need all that to be content, to question that, to, maybe some of it I do, maybe all of it I do, but just the act of questioning opens up all kinds of doors. So I think that living tea, that kind of exploration of what tea means, not from a human perspective, but what tea means from a nature perspective. This is a tree after all, right? And it's not to say that the human stuff, the thousands of years of culture and skill and mastery and all the things that stand between us and the nature, the tree, that stuff doesn't have value. It absolutely does. Deep bows and deepest respect for all of that. There's a lot, I spend a lot of time. Our magazine is mostly that. And so there's a lot there, and that's rich. And so it's not about, permanently tossing that out, but about setting it aside temporarily, which I think, as I said, later on benefits my relationship to all that too, because it restores a beginner's mind, and it restores a new sense of questioning and discovery and exploration with wonder and curiosity and respect that kind of comes back in when I do that. So, but for me, living tea or authentic tea, what's authentic in human terms is, it's so arbitrary that it doesn't take much for it to break down. It can't be really held up to any even slightly rigorous scrutiny. It washes away in so much subjectivity, and so if there's to be authenticity, it would be some kind of objective authenticity, maybe out in nature. And I appreciate that exploration. But again, I don't want to that might sound as if I'm holding that authenticity above the other authenticities, and that is a game I don't want to play. So, I value using 10 qualities of a fine tea to evaluate what is a fine tea, while recognizing also that there's a sense of arbitrariness or within that structure, that standard, right? And that's the point. That standard can, over time, inhibit my ability to meet the world and to actually be my experience, as opposed to thinking about it as I'm being it or something. To actually just be it, simply, fully, let go. So I hope that's inspiring, and I hope it's helpful. For this week, if you want to join us, really there's nothing to it. Some bowls, some leaves, some hot water, right? And we're running lots of specials this week. We've reduced the cost of the Intro to Cha Dao course. So if you want to take a course on a life of tea and all the brewing methods surrounding bowl tea, we reduced the price on that. You can go to our course website. All of our bowl tea sets are all on sale. So this whole week you can get started in this brewing method if you haven't, or encourage your friends to do so. But you don't have to, take a course or get some specific teaware. Use any bowl, a rice bowl, a cereal bowl. It doesn't really matter. and put some leaves in it and some hot water and just sit for a week and let go of all the stuff and maybe contemplate that and ask questions and think where that can lead in other areas of your life, etc. as well. But especially in tea, letting go of the, of what the intellectual stuff that kind of stands between us and the experience. So I hope that is a little bit inspirational and helps us to start this week off. It's wonderful to do this together as a community, to just rest in this simple way of making tea for a week and set down all of our pretensions and stuff and just practice for a week like this. We'll be joining you this week. I'm going to be every day Leaves in a Bowl tea over here, and the guys as well. So we'll all be joining you. We're going to have posts every day. We have some inspirational videos. Master Tsai, who loves Leaves in a Bowl tea, is going to give a teaching on Leaves in a Bowl tea, and the guys are going to share their experiences and some people in the community. We're going to have posts, and you can share stuff too. I think there's some contests or giveaways as well going on for sharing and talking about this beautiful topic, and just connecting in this way, in this simple, unadorned way with tea. So we can have a little bit of time for questions. I finally managed to gear down my big mouth and make a little space.
Lindsay Harrington is asking, Uday, can you please share about your process of choosing between method to serve a guest you're looking to share a meditative ceremony with, given that several brewing methods can be meditative?
So the question is, how do I choose the brewing method at a particular gathering when I want to have a meditative tea session? And then there was a clause that many brewing methods could be meditative. I would take that further and say any brewing method could be meditative. Choosing the brewing method, really, there's no formula. It's a combination of many things. So there is some like guidelines, some actual wisdom that I can use to calculate, and that would be based on like, what tea am I going to serve? There are certain teas that almost demand a certain brewing method. Demand is maybe a strong word, but that respond so positively to one brewing method that it seems almost a little bit of a betrayal to brew them otherwise, though you can. But they almost demand a certain brewing method. So the tea, and that will be based also on the weather, on the occasion, on the people that are coming, on how long we're going to sit. So many factors that could include diet. They could include the location, the weather, so many things. And so there's all that experience and guidelines, and then there's also intuition. There's also just a connection to what feels right. And I try to not lean too heavy on either of these. If you lean too heavily on standards, it becomes something stale and choppy and forced, right? But if you reside too much on intuition, unless you are extremely clear and well cultivated and have meditated for an extreme amount of time, so that all of the egoic impulses are easily distinguished from genuine intuition, which is not so simple, because all of those ego impulses are impulses, and intuition is a type of impulse too, and sometimes it is very difficult to distinguish them. So unless you've reached a very high level of self-awareness, relying too much on this will create something ungrounded and whimsical. So for me, the foundation is training. Lots of training. Lots of training with my teacher, who had a teacher. Lots of training with method, and then letting the purpose of training is to empower us to let go. right? Purpose of training isn't to solidify something, but to create freedom. And so it releases into intuition. And so intuition is involved as well. But there are training, right? You hang out with, this is a saying, behind every master is a chatong. A chatong is like the water bearer, the servant, the one who fans the charcoal. And we sometimes say water bearer because the word chatong, even though it's ancient, it literally means tea boy. Because in the olden days, it was always a little dude in the paintings, a little boy doing the like charcoal and water and things. And so that term is just there. But it, first of all, it's not necessary that it be a masculine term. That's silly. And second of all, there's a little bit of a derogatory or pejorative condescension in the term. So you could say chatong, but water bearer is a more like a little bit washed, more cleaner term. And we say behind the master is a water bearer, a servant. And in part that means obviously the person who's brewing can't do what they're doing if there's not somebody to help them. But it also has another deeper meaning, which is to say that every experienced person brewing tea was once themselves a chatong, was once themselves a server, a water bearer, because that apprenticeship, right? You hang out with Michelangelo and you carry his rocks, and you just sweat and carry his rocks until one day you realize that, like, I get to be there when he chooses the rocks, and you get to see him choosing, and then he'll notice that you've noticed, and that's when you'll get promoted to like chisel cleaner. Then you'll learn how to clean chisels, and so that whole training process is. You could take this in a kitchen. You start off washing dishes, and then you become a sous chef, and you learn how to prep food, right? And then you become like a saucier, and you learn how to make the sauces that go on the food, and then eventually you learn the food itself, right? So that training for me is the like basis of that selection, but then there's a healthy dose of intuition required as well. That's the best I can answer.
So Erica is asking, do you have any stories related to the first time you sat with leaves in a bowl tea?
So the question is a story about the first time I sat with leaves in a bowl tea. The very first leaves in a bowl tea. Leaves in a bowl tea. If you read the history of leaves in a bowl tea in the issue of this month, you'll get more of an idea where it went in its common form. In its common form, it has to do with gaiwans. Gai is a lid and wan is a bowl. Is a lid on a bowl. The lid came later. The bowl obviously came first, right? Though we joke about the silliness of imagining a dude with a lid looking for a bowl. But the bowl came first. The lid probably, Chinese people eat communally with the food kind of in the center, and you save food for later with a lid. So the lid most likely, came from other food type of bowls, and then started to be put on the bowl. And then if you trace the article, you'll read the evolution in the shape of the gaiwan and etc. why it is. But a lot of people today think of gaiwans as a brewing vessel, right? But that's very modern. That only goes back really to the 1980s, and that itself actually is rooted in both Taiwanese tea art and Japanese tea, actually. And that's something that could be unpacked and explored a lot. But the majority of the history from the late Ming to 1980s, the use of a gaiwan is just like this, leaves in a bowl. And so that's where the most popular or common leaves in a bowl consumption was, the mainstream of it, you could say. And then in the 1949, when the communists took over, there was, of course, this repudiation of all things old and cultural. And that culminated, of course, in the Cultural Revolution, where there was even, it was a violent socio-political revolution to destroy all of that. And so what happened is that leaves in a bowl, the bowl itself, the gaiwan itself, was set aside in most places. In some very rural parts of China, that brewing method has maintained until the present, like Sichuan. But for the most part, it was replaced with glasses or thermoses, which is still leaves in a bowl tea. It's just not a bowl, it's leaves in a glass or leaves in a thermos, right? And that continued to be the predominant way of brewing tea all the way up until, basically the early 2000s. And the reason that shifted is because, for a lot of reasons, Gongfu tea took off and spread, and the people had more leisure time, they had more money. Teaware became more mass-produced and affordable, and so with more time to learn and more affordable teaware and other cultural influences, that took off, and the tea in the glass and thermos slowly became less and less popular, because obviously you can make better tea in almost any brewing method than this, whether it be a glass or a thermos or a bowl. Putting leaves into hot water is really kind of the worst way to make tea. So if you've got the time to learn, you can make things better, in any way. And so of course people will, when they have the time and they can afford to, they will make. Of course you want to make things better. That's just obvious. What isn't, that's obvious in the mainstream. What isn't obvious is the things we've discussed in this class today, right? As they say, everybody knows the value of know-how. Everybody knows the value of goal-oriented practice, but how many people know the value of unknowing, the know-how of unknowing, right? Let alone the know-how and the value of unknowing, undoing, of being. So that's a little bit of context. However, despite that being kind of the mainstream, behind that you have a lot of other methods for leaves in a bowl tea that are far less mainstream, including some, excuse me, I have allergies, including some Buddhist, there's Buddhist traditions, which I've tapped into, but that wasn't my first experience. My first experience is a common thing amongst Taiwanese tea masters or Taiwanese, tea teachers. A lot of them have preserved leaves in a bowl tea as a secondary brewing method. Leaves in a bowl tea, by the way, has spun off into all kinds of other, even, I talked about them in the article, even some very, very rare types of tea brewing that you almost never see, including big bowls that are ladled into smaller bowls and other things like this. But a lot of tea scholars and tea lovers in Taiwan of the older generation, the generation above me and the generation above that, they have a tendency to keep around old, cracked, usually Song Dynasty Tianmu bowls. So they have a love of Tianmu bowls, as I think, an appreciation of Tianmu bowls will naturally arise in the exploration of any tea lover's tea journey. It's such an important, the bowl, that's the thing, like all tea brewing methods, no matter what they are, they go back to the bowl. If you look historically, the majority of tea lovers that have ever lived drank tea from a bowl. All tea brewing methods don't arise out of nothing. They come out of brewing methods that came before, and they all go to a bowl. And so the love of Tianmu bowls is a love of the history of tea. It's a love of the heritage of tea. It's such a important part. We have a whole issue of Global Tea about Tianmu, so I encourage you, including the history, etc. So I encourage you to do that. And it was so popular in the Song especially, but it remained produced even into the Qing. And Song is 960 to 1279. And so that time, around 1,000 years ago is when it was at its height, but it continued on. And so many of these bowls were produced at many levels, right? There was epic ones for nobles and even the emperor, and there was common people bowls. And they've also unearthed a lot of these like misfired bowls that were just like from maybe the dudes that worked at the kiln would take them home. But these things were fired in these giant dragon kilns with wood firing. So of course a lot of them, it's also, if you read the magazine about Tianmu, you'll see it's a type of glazing that has a high failure rate for a lot of reasons. And so they would just, throw them in the ground or, who knows, there's piles of them and then those got buried over time. And a lot of that's been unearthed. So there was a period in the 80s and 90s. Now, even those, because of the explosion of tea culture in the last 20 years, in mainland China especially, but around the world, but especially there, though even those cracked, wabi bowls are expensive now. And there's even fakes of them. But back in the 80s and 90s, those, getting a perfect one was expensive even then. But those cracked ones, they weren't faked, and there was a lot of them, and they were cheap. And so most tea dudes in Taiwan have some of those around, and they will periodically throw usually some young sheng pu'er, like some mao cha, or green tea. Typically those two in those song bowls, and give you leaves in a bowl tea. Though their primary brewing method is usually something, some version of gongfu tea, they tend to do that. And so my first leaves in a bowl tea came. This is a long. I get lost because I have a big mouth. I'm sorry, but all of that context leads back to where this. I guess it's necessary to understand that there are just these dudes around Taiwan that brew tea this way, and so it's not uncommon. It's not like some magical thing that happened. It was the first time I had leaves in a bowl tea was served to me by Zhou Yu, Master Zhou. And I had never brewed tea this way. I had previously brewed tea in a glass because that was, in my first trips to China in the 90s, that was still the most common brewing method. So I drank tea in a thermos and in a glass often, but not in a bowl. And that was a Song bowl. It was a Song dynasty bowl, so they're holding like a bit of history, and drinking that way was impressive to me. And I asked a lot of questions, and then I bought one of those bowls and I started doing it, and then I started exploring, and then I discovered some of the more some of the Buddhist preservation of this type of brewing as well. So kind of all spiraled from there, but that was the first time. So this brewing method isn't something. I would say it's uncommon enough that like the mainstream probably doesn't know about it very much, but it's not uncommon, and it's not so uncommon that people moving around in tea circles in Taiwan wouldn't encounter it. Let's put it that way.
Mika Hartikainen is asking, what would be a good balance between leaves in a bowl, gongfu, and boiled tea brewing methods in your practice?
So how to balance different brewing methods like gongfu and leaves in a bowl and boiled tea and things. I mean, that for me, that's what it's about really, is a balance. It brings balance to my tea practice. And I discovered that very early on, that I have a tendency towards imbalance. And that continues to this day, even after, almost, 25 years of this and maybe 15 years of consciously trying to balance these things, I still fall off balance. This happened to me this year during the pandemic, as an example. I just metaphorically woke up one day, became conscious of the fact. So it was like, I think it was probably beginning of July or late June at some point. One day I realized that I had literally spent the last 3 months every single day down a very, very deep gongfu rabbit hole. Like I had 2 notebooks full of experiments, and I took the pandemic as an opportunity. There's a particular skill in Gong Fu Tea that that I always had a desire to practice and never did. I never got around to it, and so I took this isolation and lockdown as an opportunity to explore that particular skill deeply and experiment with it as well. And 3 months later, I just woke up and realized every day for the last 3 months, I've gone like 1 or 2 or even 3 sessions a day, all Kung Fu, and all very deep and like very down to micro details and this and that, and gotten all geeky. And then I was like, whoa. And then, so I lost balance. And then, of course, you have a tendency to want to correct by going this way. And so I want to I need 2 weeks of leaves in a bowl tea. But then, usually after a week or so of that, you kind of realize, oh, okay, I'm not, So balance for me, again, part training, part intuition, and part self-awareness. And just, I really love the way that these forces can, especially when you hold them separate, and don't allow them to mix and blend in weird ways. That's important. I think their power is like charcoal. When you heat water with charcoal, it's not the charcoal itself that heats the water, it's the space between the charcoal, the air that gets hot. So for me, that's a really good analogy. When I have these different things held next to each other, there's power in that. That's life wisdom as well. The Buddha said the wings to awakening are equanimity and sensitivity. So equanimity is bowl tea, sensitivity is Gong Fu Tea in this instance, right? Equanimity is a sense of balance and ease with the vicissitudes of life, not evaluating things as good or bad, letting things be. Yatha bhuta, as the Buddha said, right? As it is. Just, being equanimous, right? With whatever is bowl tea. But too much equanimity and you start to get dull. You get close to, it's almost like being on drugs or something. You start to, be unaware. And too much sensitivity and you get tight and snobby and snooty and picky. And then you can't enjoy anything. You get to such a level of micro detail that nothing is suitable, right? Like some kind of stereotypical cartoon story comic where we have a rich guy going to a restaurant and he orders the $150 bowl of soup, but then he sends it back because it's slightly too cool or something. So he's not satisfied by even something very expensive and lavish. So we can get off balance in these. We have to keep in balance our sensitivity and our equanimity. And so that's really about where it is. And that's different for all of us personally. I'm incredibly geeky and always have been. And I grew up my father's a scientist, so I grew up in a home, a very intellectually oriented home. And so I geek out, and I have a tendency more to go this way. And then wake up 3 months later and I'm super geeked out and notebooks everywhere, and I need to drink some leaves in a bowl tea. But you could go the other way and become kind of, I guess this way would lead to more like laziness or just like gulping. You might replace the bowl with a mug or a glass, and then slowly, which by itself that step is not doesn't matter, but eventually you realize it lost the sensitivity, right? Tea can't all be just this kind of meditative space as well. There has to be some kind of, that's in the next issue in September. That's part of why we ceremonialize this, that it brings a nice balance and healthy balance in that.
Question from the comments. Can someone be too Zen?
Can someone be too Zen? Well, that depends how you're defining Zen. That's an incredibly powerful question. So, like all powerful questions, it opens. The answer is yes and no. If the word Zen comes from the southern Chinese pronunciation of Chan, which was pronounced Can in the south. And Chan itself is a translation of the Sanskrit dhyana. And dhyana is very difficult to translate, but without paragraphs, but basically the meditative mind. Zen begins with the flower sermon, where during the retreat season, the Buddha would, the monks would separate during the day and meditate all day, and in the evening they would blow the conch and come, and the Buddha would give a discourse to inspire and offer guidance so that they could continue their retreat. And one evening he didn't say anything. He sat in silence, and at some point in the middle of the discourse, he held up a flower. And they say something, it's not even a thing, something isn't the right word. But transmission happened between him and one of his students, Mahakashyapa, and he said, later Mahakashyapa received the nonverbal transmission outside the scriptures and has taken this lotus. There's a lot of ways of translating the words that he said, but that's the essence of them. And that's really the birth of Zen. So if by Zen you mean the meditative mind, is it possible to be too much meditative mind? Absolutely not. How do you exhaust that? That's not exhaustible. Even the question of how much, even the quantification of that is impossible. It can't be measured. So if you can't measure it, how do you say too much? You can't measure it in the first place. There's no standard of measure. What do you have, a cup of meditative mind? Or 2 cups or a gallon, right? So the answer to that is no, wrong question. Or the question can't be answered in the terms that it's been asked in. If, however, by Zen you mean Zen Buddhism, you mean clothes and rituals and books and ways of talking and thinking and ideas and philosophy, and then you're touching on the entire conversation I'm having today, which is about why Leaves in a Bowl is like so important. Is like, you could say, is there such a thing as too much tea? And I would say yes. Push it aside and put some leaves in a bowl and let go of all the stuff, all the chemistry, geography, culture, brewing methods, ideas, etc. All the evaluation, all the this, all the better, the worst, let it go. And in fact, there's an ancient term in Chinese, we say chanqiu chou wei, which means to stink of Zen. To stink of Zen is to like, this isn't even something restricted to Zen. It's something very important to both Confucianism and more Taoist philosophies, where in Confucianism there's this idea of like the village poser. That's literally the translation of this dude, the village poser. The dude who's like, he wears the like proper clothes of the Confucian, and he has the like hat and the stuff, and he even does the like mannerisms of Confucianism, but it's not fully in his heart, or he has maybe twisted it towards goals. He's using it to achieve social standing or wealth, etc., etc. And so this idea of chanqiu wei, the stink of Zen, something my teacher often used to say is there's nothing more un-Zen than saying you're Zen. Right? To say you're Zen is something very un-Zen. I once saw him I saw a funny example of this. After a ceremony, we were standing outside, and he was in full robes, like inner and outer, the kesa, everything. He's in, full monastic robes. And this kind of tourist lady, I think she was a tourist, I don't know, but not from there, came up and said like, "Oh, are you a Zen monk?" to him. And he looked at her and said, "No." And the no wasn't like, "Get out of here." It wasn't facetious. It wasn't silly. It was earnest. He was really saying no. And there's all kinds of ways of unpacking that. Like, I could unpack that in terms of like humility and saying like, no, I haven't earned that, because I can resonate with that. I don't I don't feel like an ordination or transmission ceremony or initiation ceremony changed me, or that I have in any way lived up to it. In fact, the opposite. I've fallen flat on my face. I'm a complete hack at this Zen thing. I look back at my Zen career and just like, man, you've really bumbled this thing. So maybe that, but also just this, like, you know, if you're talking about that, then, you know, there's a famous slogan that I like a lot, which is, I burn all the scriptures in my bag, but the verses that are in my gut will remain with me for the rest of my life. So can you stink of Zen? Absolutely. And we have to, you know, just like you can, that's kind of what Leaves in a Bowl tea is about. It's like about not stinking of tea, of any of the like pretension, or like I know what's good tea, or what's good, the right way to brew tea, or the authentic way, or I have this or that, I have this teaware, that teaware, you know, letting go of all that. And like, what if we just brew tea the worst way? And not even because it's the worst way, not with that intention, right? Really, but just let go of all that, you know? And so if that's the spirit of your question, when you say too much Zen, it's like, are you saying too much like philosophizing, too much ritual, too much? Yes. However, I would suggest, if the spirit of the question is also coming from a like poke, I would poke back and say, you know, in this day and age, look at you, and only you can answer this, my friend, as I can only answer it for myself. But when you look at your own life, and you look at what you value, do you feel as if you have too much structure, discipline, tightness, mastery, control, ritual, or too little, and things are sloppy and cluttered, and you need more of that Zen? You know, so that's really, sometimes there's a like you're trying to shirk all form, which is, again, that is the goal of form as well. You have to remember, the goal of all that Zen stuff is to facilitate that Zen, that dhyana, that what was transmitted in that holding up of that lotus, the real Zen. And that basket of stuff, those rituals and methods and meditations and guidance and philosophy and dialogues and scriptures that all remain, they're all tools and aids, and a raft is an analogy that's often used, a boat, a staff is another analogy, or even a railing. Zen is the 1,000-li railing, the thing that you can use to take the path. And so all of those things, they can certainly get in the way. As you know, as they say, religion can prevent the religious experience, but it can also facilitate it. And those things can be really helpful to facilitate it. So training isn't to lock us into some dogma or doctrine, especially not Zen training, especially when one of the fundamentals of Zen is no dogma, no doctrine, no scripture. Again, it is something transmitted outside of the scriptures. That's what the Buddha said Mahakashyapa received. That's what was handed down, 27 generations later. We have the 28th holder of that lineage, Bodhidharma, who then comes to China and this is the legend, right? And so, but training is to empower freedom. Because when you set something free, there's a fundamental difference between setting something untrained free and setting something trained free. There's a strong difference between me, who has zero training in the saxophone, picking it up and just and the of Coltrane. When he's free, no doubt. But he's empowered, I guess is the thing. And you could use anything as an example for this, be it athletics or music or even martial arts, right? So it's not like when you get into a situation where that martial artist needs to be in an actual combat, they can't start doing forms. They have to be free and responsive and to the environment and stuff. But they're empowered. Through that training, they're empowered. And so that for me is what the training, what you're calling Zen. You know, because if you're talking about the real Zen, I guess, it has no line around it. And so you can't measure it and you can't qualify it as too much or too little. But if you're talking about the training part, certainly that can become an identity. That can be something someone puts on and they're a village poser and they stink of Zen, right? And, you know, that's why I have, over the course of my personal journey, I have focused more on what's called 生活禅, which means the living Zen, the daily life Zen, the Zen of tea, so and sweeping, and you know, which for me is an outlet that can benefit from that training and also bypass it. But I don't, you know, I pray every day, I chant every day, I meditate morning and evening. A lot of those rituals, my house is full of altars. You know, a lot of those rituals are also a part of my day.
So Eric is asking, have you ever taken a break from tea, as in stepped away so you can return with fresh eyes?
Says, have you ever taken a break from tea so that you can step away and return with fresh eyes? For me, that's kind of what leaves in a bowl is. It's a break from tea. That's like you just defined I mean, this can't be defined, so don't hold it, because then you ruin it. But you maybe in one sentence, Erica, said better what I've said the whole hour, which is just, you know, leaves in a bowl tea is a break from tea. It's at least a break from all of the like, you know, all the like philosophy or intellectualization or categorization or method. It's a break from all of those. It's a break in just like TST, you know, not even that it's a beverage versus a ceremony, all of it gone. If you're saying like stop drinking tea, yes, I mean it happens. And I did that intentionally, but for other purposes. Part of my training in Gong Fu tea, my teacher had us. He had us spend, I think it was the months, I don't remember, but 3 months or something, just brewing water. And there's all kinds of reasons for that. And I did it, and I only cheated 2 days out of the 3 months. It's funny because I went to him and said, "Oh man, I was like bummed. I was like, man, I cheated 2 days," and he laughed, and he said, "Actually, only cheating 2 days might be the record. So you're in good shape." But yeah, so I've done that, but it was kind of it wasn't with the intention that you're speaking of like resetting. But for me, leaves in a bowl tea really is what you're saying. It's about because when you say you want to refresh your mind, right? It's not the substance of tea that you need distance from to do that. Well, I mean, are you trying to refresh your gut? When you say, like, have you ever stepped away from tea to get a fresh beginner's mind perspective, right? Are you talking about, like, I need a fresh gut biome that has no tea in it in order to have a fresh perspective on tea? No, of course not. So when you say you want a fresh perspective, what you're talking about stepping away from isn't the substance. Otherwise, you would have used different language. You would have said, like, have you ever stepped away from tea to, like, reset your digestive system or your, I don't know, whatever, endocrine system or other systems that tea interacts with in our body. But you didn't use that language. You said to refresh your perspective. So what you're talking about refreshing is all the mind-made stuff that you've collected, be it intellectual knowledge about tea varietals and types, or geographical or cultural information, or brewing methods, or the process of evaluating tea, or the philosophy of tea, and all the things we're talking about today, all this junk, right? When you want to refresh, you're talking about letting go of all that, washing all that away. And for me, that's what Leaves in a Bowl tea is. So I don't feel like it's necessary to step away from the substance of tea to get that beginner's mind and fresh perspective. Unless you're talking about fasting from tea in your body, but that would be for different reasons. And I've done that too. To maybe fast from whatever you want to say, the caffeine, the effects of it on your digestion, or et cetera, et cetera. But that would be something different. That's not the way you phrased the question. You talked about refreshing your mind. And that's why I said in one sentence, you maybe captured everything I've been trying to say today better and more poignantly. Leaves in a Bowl tea is a stepping away from tea to refresh your spirit and mind and appreciation. And so when I say stepping away from tea, that tea should be in quotes. So it's not stepping away from the substance, it's stepping away from anything called tea. Anything mental, anything that's been added or superimposed that isn't in the leaf itself. Anything that's not in the leaf. Stepping away from that is basically what you were asking, and that's basically what Leaves in a Bowl tea is for me. Is that stepping away from anything quote unquote tea. Letting go. And so that's what this week is about. And we take a week and kind of celebrate that. But it's not a celebrating of a philosophy or a something. It's a celebrating of the absence of something. It's hard to do in language, right? And in my own bumbling way, I've tried to do that today to inspire that. I hope it was helpful a little bit. But again, feel free to toss all of this over your shoulder. It's not, none of it is really necessary. It's more direct. So I hope that it inspired it. I can't wait to share this week of Leaves in a Tea with all of you. I hope that again, let go of any of these ideas and let it just be simple. Let it just be simple, simple, simple. And that's how you step away from tea and refresh your perspective and your mind and state of being and let go of all those things. And I hope that brings you some peace and contentment and maybe a newfound appreciation for what is enough in tea. And a newfound appreciation for aspects of tea that maybe you didn't notice before because you were focused on what you had defined as quality. Whatever you had valued in tea, you were brewing to get that out of it. And you were doing that so much because that's the other thing. It narrows our focus. When we're focused on value, we get, our depth of field goes down. That's true about our eyes. The fovea of our eyes have a very small depth of field. And when we focus on a value, and we're like, this is what I'm after when I drink tea, there's a lot in the periphery. And that periphery stuff, there's a lot of stuff in there that maybe we've missed out on because we've been too focused on getting a particular thing from tea. Maybe it's flavors, maybe it's aromas, maybe it's a meditation or ceremony or, something philosophical, something sensual, something we've been focused on. And this is what I value in tea. This is why I drink tea. And this is what I'm after. And my brewing starts to try to bring that out into tea. And that thing that I'm bringing out, that thing I'm focusing on, can foreclose on other aspects of tea. And so this can open that up, and you can start to see what's in the periphery, see what's around, and question what you've been valuing, question what you've been pursuing, whatever that thing is. Some state of mind, some sensual pleasure, some practical philosophical thing, whatever you've been pursuing in tea, right? There are other things, right? There's so much more. And so what happens when you kind of let go of whatever it is that you've been valuing and trying to get out of the tea in your brewing, and you let go of goals, and you start to just let it be enough without any of that. What happens? Can you let go of that and let it be all good, or or all bad, just all itself, basically. So I hope that a week of that results in new insights and new ideas and new ways of being, and a heightened appreciation for simplicity, for real, just simple, down to earth, just tea. And not even just tea, because those are words, but this. So lots of love, lots of blessings for a beautiful week. We'll be posting lots of cool stuff. Feel free to interact and send more questions in the social medias, and guys will answer. And we'll be posting some videos, including a really cool one from Master Tsai that I hope you guys enjoy. And thank you so much for joining us today and sharing some tea and some thinking and thoughts and inspiration and contemplation together.